I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. With me on the phone, Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way out there in Ottawa, Ontario, our nation's capital. Again, lots going on. It's our Friday show of the really big show. So the big stuff in our news is obviously the our Liberal leadership race, a possible election, and the health minister is calling on the Liberals to delay, or calling on, like he wants Jagmeet to keep the Liberals in power until September. No surprise there.
Till October, even a little bit longer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
This
that's Mark
is,
Holland, I think he's probably the biggest name supporter of Chrystia Freeland in the
yeah.
leadership election. But yeah, he's saying, he's kind of trying to leverage the pharmacare thing, which was that was one of the things that the NDP wanted from the Liberals in exchange for their support over recent years. So he's trying to say, like, let's sort that out and spend 2025 doing that. And then we'll have an election in October.
They seem to really want to look after themselves before they hear the voices of Canadians. That doesn't.
Well, I
That's
think it's because they just, like we said yesterday, it's all about polls. And the polls have been saying now for about 18 months that the Liberals are going to lose. And they don't want to lose. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their ministerial jobs, but they also don't want to lose their jobs as MPs. And they despise the Conservative Party so much that they want to prevent them, or take any opportunity that they can to prevent them from potentially coming to power. And in secondary in this discussion, obviously, is things such as democracy and the will of the Canadian people and what the Canadian people might want or prefer.
hmm Mark Carney. Yesterday was the one of the payment dates, the second payment, the non-refundable payment, and lo and behold, there is a drop. Jamie Baptiste has dropped, and guess who he supported? Mark Carney. No
Yeah,
surprise there.
he was with Carney just now in Halifax. He made an announcement there, made a sort of had a speech there, which we'll discuss later. But quite an interesting little medal he's got around his neck there, isn't it? Of a map of the Western Hemisphere.
hmm Canada first, right?
Yeah, Western Hemisphere first, I guess.
Yeah. Um, we seem to have lost. There we go. It's back. And then, again, no real big surprise. The CTV put out a story. Carney to scrap the consumer carbon tax and replace with green incentives. No surprise there. That is the pillar, the number one pillar for the Liberal Party for the past 9 years, and I don't think anybody's has any appetite to put that forward anymore. So I guess for sure that there'll be no increase come April. And will they take it completely off? That'll be the interesting thing. Will they remove it completely or just say they're going to pause it where it is? That'll be the interesting piece of it.
Well, he says his exact words were he wants to cancel and replace it immediately. That's what he said.
Yeah,
And
replace it with what though? I guess that's the big question, right? So, because he's
well,
still,
he
I
did.
mean,
He explained that he want. Well, another thing, there's another carbon tax that a lot of people don't really talk about, which is like the industrial one. It's not called a carbon tax, obviously. Like these things don't tend to be called what they actually are. But there's another one on like industrial polluters, and he said he wants to keep that in place. So it's only really it's only the what's called the consumer carbon price or whatever sort of euphemism they use to describe what we know as the carbon tax. That's the only one that's going to be replaced. But he said he wants to put instead, he wants to get the big polluters, as he calls them, to fund an incentive scheme, basically, so that people can it wasn't all that clear. He likes to use a lot of technical terms to pretend that he's being detailed, but it really wasn't very detailed. But it sounds to me like it's kind of he wants to tax industry and use that money to as handouts to Canadians so they can like get insulation and things like that, like better insulation and or buy an EV or whatever it might be. And then he wants to sort of keep the money flowing because he said it's like a lot of people are going to miss the money if we just kill it all together. So we've got to keep the money flowing. So it sounds to me like rather than just tax the average person at the pump and then redistribute that money, several months later. Instead, they're just going to tax big firms. But he says that apparently this is going to make Canada into a green energy superpower or clean energy superpower.
Hmm.
That Canada's going to leapfrog America. That was his exact verb that he used. He said that the Americans are currently experiencing a fever. Basically he just said that they've turned mad. They're just lunatics. But he said that will end pretty soon, and then America will come back and be sensible again. And he thinks that if he adopts this plan, then Canada will be like way ahead, and the Americans will have to catch up with Canada. That was basically his argument.
Uh, I guess I'll just leave it there. There you go. I just leave it there. Chrystia Freeland says Canada should target Elon Musk. There you go. So she's really uh, uh, whatever trying to appeal to a base there, the people that hate Elon, and so she's going after Elon Musk, and she wants to test. Sounds like Gavin Newsom, right? They want to target Tesla. So here's one hand say they want to incentivize EVs, best EVs in the world, clearly by like a long shot, but not even like it's not even a like you need a telescope to see second place. And so they want one to say we want to incentivize EVs, but not Teslas. Does that make sense to you?
I guess if you want to put your cynical hat on, it'll make sense because there are no Tesla production facilities in Canada. And but there are, at great expense to the taxpayer, there are plans underway to produce Volkswagen and Stellantis, I think it is, isn't it, to produce EVs from them. So if you tariff Tesla in that situation, then you kind of feed your own beast, don't you, that you've
Yeah.
paid for because that no money, no taxpayers' money has been thrown at Tesla, and Tesla hasn't given any money to Canada or
Yeah.
invested any money in
Well,
Canada. So on that sort of level, it makes sense. But then what you said is probably also important. It's like it's classic populism. It's a
yeah.
populist gesture. It's saying, look at this fat cat down there in America who gives all of his money to Trump. We're gonna punish him. We're gonna punish the bad guy to protect the little guy. Kind of. It's just like
I don't. I
it's
don't. I
just
don't.
a
Yeah.
gesture.
I'll correct you there. He doesn't give all his money to Trump. He has supported Trump, but
No, obviously that was
yeah.
hyperbole. I mean, of
Yeah.
course he hasn't given out all of his money. Nobody would say that. But he is the biggest donor,
Yeah.
which
And then
is very,
also
very significant.
Volkswagen, I wouldn't be betting a lot on Volkswagen. They're having so much trouble in Europe, which from Volkswagen's shutting down plants. So I don't know. They're having so much trouble in Europe right now that I can't see them investing in Canada. You know what I mean? They're going to have to fight to keep their base alive in Europe.
Well, they can't even do it in Europe, can they? But the problem is Canada is in a situation where they could poach the German and the European car companies because of the cheaper energy. But obviously, with the tax regime and with the climate change plans, fighting climate change, as they say, that makes Canada less competitive vis-a-vis the United States. So they're just going to go to the US. It's kind of they might well come over to this neighborhood, but it's going to be south of the border, I would imagine.
Yeah, and then our MP Melanie Jolie's down there in D.C. trying to stop the tariffs, which are due tomorrow, actually. So remains to be seen what happens. But Melanie
She's got
Jolie,
Mark
along,
Miller there as well.
yeah, a couple of people are down there trying to do the thing, and Danielle Smith is working the back channels too. So Danielle Smith working
Mark
hard at
Miller.
showing. What's that? Go ahead.
I was saying, it's funny that Mark Miller's gone down there because he's one of the very few Canadian political figures. Melanie Joly is not one of these people, I would add, but Miller is one of the very few Canadian politicians that is kind of like somewhat broken through the insularity barrier that exists within the United States. Like some people in the US know who Mark Miller is, and it's not for good reasons. It's for the Gaza Palestinian refugee scheme, which a lot of Americans thought
Yeah.
was ridiculous, and they really acted out against that. You know, a lot of Americans on the Republican side, and then also Tom Homan, the border man, Mr. Border. He didn't. I don't think he mentioned Mike Miller by name, but he mentioned his policies, and this was like 2 months ago, maybe a month ago on CTV, where he said like Canada's just been letting in anybody. They've just been letting in so many random people from all over the world, and then those people can just come into the US, and they just use Canada as a kind of like a place to land, and then they come to the US. So it's a little bit ironic, or a little bit sort of pitiable, maybe, or even stupid, you might say, that they've sent Mark Miller down there because he's not somebody that's looked upon within the Republican Party with favor. Quite the opposite.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the last stupid thing to do, nor is it the first. Ruby, Ruby is tearing up the airwaves, right? Ruby, if nothing else, is definitely trying to get noticed, but not getting a lot of airtime with the legacy media here in Canada. She has something to say here, so we're going to play this clip from Ruby.
Mr. President, we are both business people, and the time has come to do a deal. A deal in which our citizens and our countries all win. Tariffs are not the answer. Let's meet and let's get this deal done.
Do you think she's going to get an invitation from Donald Trump?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so
What do you think?
I know that the Liberal Party has been proudly promoting that they've got 400,000 people registered from like the 100,000 that were registered before to vote for this leadership race. I guess it'd be interesting to see how many of those are bots and how many of those are. I know that there's a lot of people on the internet saying, well, me and my 5 dogs have all registered and we're ready to vote. So there's a lot of that out there.
Alongside Winston Churchill, Chairman Mao, and other assorted figures from history, they're all ready to vote as well.
And then the Liberal Party responded with a threat that says if anybody's registered that's not legitimate, cannot face up to a $10,000 fine. But no, like I have no idea how they're going to impose this fine because there's no law that says that, right? So the Liberals are going to. I guess that'll be a future law. They'll come back and punish you maybe or something if they get government. They'll create this law that'll go back in time and punish you for voting for, whoever.
Well, if it's Chrystia Freeland that wins, maybe she'll resurrect her nice little get inside of your bank account and freeze your money plan that she enforced in 2022, whatever it was.
Mark Carney gave that advice as well, so he can claim some fame for that too.
Yeah, how generous of him to give that advice.
Yeah, so I think, he's been giving that advice, so it's hard for them to say that he's an outsider. If you want to talk outsider, like Mark Carney says, he's the outsider. Clearly, the only outsider right here is Ruby. Ruby is an outsider, and they probably want her far outside.
I would say Chandra Arya was also an outsider, but he claims that there was sort of dirty dealings that resulted in being excluded. But yeah, I would say the Rubester, she's just about the primary outsider, I'd say. I mean, she isn't even, well, nor is Mark Carney an MP, I guess, but she's not an MP, and she's nowhere near the Liberal establishment, is she? Whereas Carney is at the absolute center of it. So yeah.
Well, she has one thing over Carney. She was an MP. At least at one point, she has garnered a Canadian vote. He does not have a single Canadian vote to his name, yet wants the top job. So
that's true, but let's see how many bots vote for him.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, though, right? Another one of these policies that are now falling by the wayside. Breaking news: Bloomberg just put it out. Ottawa announces deferral in implementing its capital gains changes. So. That one sounds like it's going to die on the vine as well, along with the carbon tax. So a lot of their policies that they put out are just falling by the wayside. And the one that's coming due here, so you still have lots of time to buy taco chips and all those kind of things because you're up to February 15th to get those GST taco chips. or
Yeah,
Cheetos or
but I
whatever
mean,
you like.
I don't have it written down anywhere or anything like that. So just completely just off the top of my head, shall we try and go through the policies that they've abandoned in the
Sure.
last, ever since they started to go down in the polls? So one that comes to mind straight away is housing. Like the idea that housing was a federal responsibility, that concept was being laughed at by Justin Trudeau and his entire government not very long ago. But now apparently they're the party of housing. So that's one area that they backtracked. Then the carbon tax, obviously that's
Which is
basically
the
gone.
one of the biggest
Immigration.
pillars, right, that they've run, and the suppression of our natural resources. I'd like to hear what they plan to do with Stephen Jabot as the environment minister, because that's the main complaint from Alberta, Daniel Smith, saying he needs to be fired.
Well, he's all in with Carney, isn't he? So I guess that's going to be something that Carney will have to explain to the Albertans.
Now, Chrystia
But yeah, I
Freeland,
mean,
she hasn't said anything about him.
yeah, it's just it's kind of tough. It's a real tough ask, isn't it, for a party to turn its back on so many policies, and these are like huge policies as well.
The
To
capital
turn its
gains
back on
one
all
is,
of them, and yeah, definitely. But I mean, the carbon tax is the prince of them all, really. But and then immigration. I mean, that's kind of central to Justin Trudeau's time in government, I mean, like in terms of the changes that Canada's seen over his time as prime minister. And all of a sudden, he just came out one day and said, like, this was like a year ago or more, maybe even 2 years ago. He just came out one day and said there are too many immigrants and they're undercutting people's salaries and they're basically like putting too much pressure, like the exact things that the Liberals used to say were almost like racist to say. But that's one. And yeah, I mean, what's left? What is actually left now for them
yeah.
to stand on?
The capital gains tax is a big one, because I was just at a seminar yesterday, and it was on AI. And one of the big comments there was one of the people that has done quite well in this local community said that he knows of 4 projects that have left Canada because of the capital gains tax. So the people that would be investing in AI companies. He said they've just gone to the US because it's a lot, they don't have that fear of the capital gains tax, and it's just a lot more friendly. And he says capital is fleeing Canada.
Yeah, and then the argument that the Liberals put forward for that, and Chrystia Freeland was one of the big, she was obviously one of the big proponents, and I can remember her coming out a lot to defend that policy. But the argument from the Liberals was, don't you think the richest people in society in Canada should pay just a tiny little bit more so that we can have all these lovely services like $10 a day daycare, which doesn't exist, and so on and so on. That was basically the argument, and it's kind of like I can understand that. And I think a lot of people are sympathetic to that argument, but you also have to be pragmatic, don't you? Because it's not just about what you want and what you think is right and nice and sweet. It's also about what is actually possible. And if you do it, if you put a tax like that in place, it could end up being the case that your revenue is actually substantially smaller and you have less money as a government and less money for things like daycare because all of your high taxpayers, high earners, have just left and just gone somewhere else. So you can't. Yeah, they try and make it into a moral point, but it's. I don't think this is a moral point. I think this is a pragmatic point. You have to be pragmatic, and even if you don't like the idea that wealthy people can maybe like hold more of their money, it doesn't really matter if it's going to make you poorer to tax them. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, let's keep in mind that the capital gains tax is in Canada, and it was at 50% of the capital gains is taxable, and they want to raise that amount. So I mean, it's not like there was no tax, and it was just raising the inclusion rate. So if people
Yeah.
are confused on that, Jagmeet Singh, definitely he has the keys, right? Because he's in the news with like support, no support, support, and this has been going on for how long, right? Where he pulls the support, adds the support. And now he's saying again, because just recently he said he might like support the Liberals to get some bills passed, and now he's saying he's definitely going to call for a non-confidence vote when Parliament resumes March 24th.
Yeah, but a lot of the media, well, basically all the media, seem to have failed to have picked up that this is a backsliding from him. This is he's reneged on a promise. His promise was that he would call he'd force an election, he'd force the government to fall at the earliest opportunity. Those are his exact words, at the earliest opportunity. He said that more than once. But now that is no longer the case because he's saying he wants Parliament to resume and then he wants to pass a load of bills. So that wouldn't be the earliest opportunity.
And
So
throwing.
he has actually changed his tune.
Yeah, we have a clip here we can play though. Let's listen to what Jagmeet has to say here.
Yeah, so I want to be really clear on this. We are still going to be voting against the government at the end of March. But there's 2 months before that happens. And in those 2 months, if there's anything we can do to support workers, first and foremost, and to fight back against these tariffs against us, let's do it. So absolutely, we need retaliatory tariffs. I've said that. I think anyone running for prime minister needs to commit to that. On top of that, I've said let's look at other things as well. We can cut off the flow of critical minerals. We know the United States needs Canada. We're the only reliable source of critical minerals. And it's also going to hit Donald Trump's buddy, Elon Musk, where it counts, because he needs those minerals for the batteries in his car plants. So let's be very serious about fighting back. But let's also put in place protection for these workers.
Look at that. Elon Musk is a target for Jagmeet Singh as well. So Elon Musk has definitely put his hand up there by, like he's saying a lot of stuff on X there. So he's the lightning rod that people like to use for sure. And
he's mentioned Musk a few times in the past, actually, as well, saying that in the Liberals and the NDP, they're both trying to beat Pierre Poilievre with Elon Musk. Because they see that Elon Musk has become a bit of a hate figure for the left. And actually, the centre as well, I would say, don't really like Elon Musk in Canada. And so they're trying to use him to sink. They're trying to attach him to Pierre Poilievre because Pierre Poilievre has received some favourable reviews from Elon. And then they argue he reciprocated by saying, I'd love it if you came and brought Tesla to Canada. So that's what I think. It's just pure politics, really. It's just kind of opportunism in a way.
And Danielle Smith is pitching a border czar just like they have in the United States, and she's pitching retired General Rick Hillier to be, and retired Lieutenant General and ex-Liberal MP Andrew Leslie to have a border czar here in Canada. It might make sense to have somebody actually in charge of the border, right? So we can actually strengthen our border. And then, that fentanyl, another big bust, and I think it was in Calgary where Calgarians are busted for another big fentanyl thing. I mean, we need to stop all this fentanyl that's killing people on either side of the border.
Absolutely. I mean, it's still very sad though. I saw like a Trump acolyte, a servant of Donald Trump in the media, posted quite a sort of, it was on X, I believe, posted quite a popular image of himself, or it got a lot of attention, where I think he was in, maybe it was like Vermont, but it was somewhere next to Quebec. And he just kind of posted a picture of himself saying, like, look at this border. It's like, it's a sign. It's literally a sign that says, don't cross the border. And he was like laughing at this idea as if to say, it's a ridiculous situation. But that's kind of what Americans and Canadians, I would say a majority, like about the border, is that it isn't some sort of like militarized, walled off, like DMZ, It is like a border between friends because both countries are or used to be civilized. But now the Americans or the American right have got this brain dead idea into their skulls that the northern border is the problem. And it's just kind of, I think it's quite sad to see that. And I do think in the long run, that's actually probably going to backfire on the Republicans.
I think it's the longest, for the most part, unprotected border in the world. And I mean, I grew up on the border in a small town called Midway, and basically it's a barbed wire fence with a couple of steel posts every, I can't remember how many yards. There's a steel post, and on one side it says Canada, and the other side it says USA. But no, we used to have a lot of people walk into Midway, and they'd say, "How do you get across the border?" And like, there's a fence right over there.
But that's a good thing, isn't it? That's rightly celebrated, I think, and even still. So I feel like the idea of that border becoming militarized that's going to upset quite a lot of people, I think. And I mean, it just seems a tad odd, really. All this attention, like the spotlight is on Canada because Canada's being bullied by the big kid. And it's a little bit, it's like, it's not justice. I'm looking at this, and it's not justice at all, because the Americans, let's be honest, let's go back in history. The Americans have always been the problem. All
Did we lose you there?
launched invasions across that border. They're the ones that have sponsored Irish terrorists to come and try and raise hell in Canada. You know, they are the danger, and they're the ones that put guns over the border, and back in the day, cocaine and all the other drugs of the past. And yet Canada's just kind of like lying down and taking these kicks. And I think that is why Danielle Smith has attracted quite a lot of abuse from some people, because they kind of say, like, what are you talking about? America, like, America's the problem. Why are you pretending that Canada's the problem?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people commenting right now, and the thing is that it is the Americans' responsibility to staff that border as well, and both sides of us to staff that border. But I think one of the complaints from the Americans is that our lax immigration policies, like you mentioned earlier in the show, where we're bringing in a lot of people from different countries without really good vetting, and that puts them in a position to cross that border.
Yeah, and that's true. That well, it's certainly true. As somebody that is an immigrant to this country, I can tell you that I had to do a lot of research to come here, to, like, when you process the citizenship application and the visa and all the rest of it. And there are there are like forums and guides and immigration lawyers and stuff that advise you. And you will see constantly people say that Canada's easier to get to, and they want to come to Canada as a way to get to the US. Like, that's just a fact. I mean, people do that, and it's certainly been the case for a number of years now that it's easier to legally migrate to Canada than it is the US. But is that not a little rich coming from the Americans, when they've had, basically, to all intents and purposes, an open border with the entire planet, with Mexico? It's just, I mean, how many times can you be slapped by somebody who is in the wrong and told to get your house in order when their house is burned down? Just a little bit of an insult, and I think that might partly explain it. It's like a distraction technique, because the Americans have been very, very bad neighbors to Canada for many, many years, and their distraction play now is to say, fix your situation, Canada. You're the bad guy.
Yeah, Bank of Canada lowered the interest rates yesterday, and then somebody, actually, a journalist, is calling out Tiff Macklin here for like what he said a number of years ago. We're going to play the clip from yesterday first, him defending himself.
Good morning. I'd like to turn backwards a bit to the bank's recent report on its pandemic actions. The staff report talked about bank communications, including the communications about keeping interest rates near zero. So I'd like to ask you about this comment in the report. It said, central banks often adjust or simplify the wording, particularly to make it clear and more accessible. Communication is often further simplified or interpreted by the media and people providing financial advice. This can very easily lead to the public understanding or interpreting the guidance in ways the central bank does not intend. When a central bank does not follow what it has perceived to have said, this can be seen as a broken promise. Did you break a promise to Canadians? Did journalists and financial experts mislead Canadians?
Look, I think we learned from this that forward guidance has its uses, but it has to be used very carefully. And with the benefit of hindsight, in retrospect, we should have been clear about sort of the exit clauses, the conditions under which this would hold. And I think, yes, I think in the process of communicating it, those conditions weren't as clear as they should have been.
You see how he tries to he didn't like the question, obviously, but I'd like to remind Canadians of what he said, and we're going to play that clip for what he said. This is what this journalist is talking about. Here's the clip that he originally said.
And they're going to be there for a long time. We recognize that Canadian businesses are facing an unusual amount of uncertainty. And so we have been unusually clear about the future path for interest rates. If you've got a mortgage, or if you're considering to make a major purchase, or you're a business and you're considering making an investment, you can be confident that interest rates will be low for a long time.
And there you have it. And shortly after that, interest rates were raised 19-fold in unprecedented fashion, which is why our economy is kind of like stalling. We actually had negative GDP today. That kind of advice, I mean, he was very clear on, he said, you can be confident, right? And people took out those mortgages and that, and anybody, he's our #1 financial advisor in Canada. I think, like anybody else in public sector would be fired, or private sector would be fired for that type of advice and the damage that it's done to Canadians.
Yeah, and then the funniest thing of all, to me at least, is that the Bank of Canada and the governor sort of hide behind this idea that you're not supposed to criticize them, because that's
They did.
politicizing a neutral institution.
When Pierre Poilievre did criticize him, the Liberals went crazy with, well, how this is really dangerous, and it's criticizing our financial institutions and all this stuff. Like, if we don't criticize these people and hold them to account, that's what you're supposed to do with power. You're supposed to hold it to account. And
Totally.
you could tell him, you could see him squirm when they asked that question, because he knew it was coming. And nobody's really in mainstream media held him to account for this piece there that were in 2020 when he said that piece, because it's hurt so many Canadians.
Yeah, and I think this is like emblematic of a wider phenomenon in recent years, which is, we've talked about it a number of times, like the idea of the expert as almost like somebody that exercises power, independent of democratic scrutiny, or any kind of scrutiny, like media scrutiny, anything, because they're the experts. It's almost like the senior bishops in the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages or something. It's just like you just do not question what they do. And I think the Bank of Canada, I mean, in many ways, Tiff Macklem is of more significance and has more power. His decisions are more consequential than the finance minister in many ways, I would say. You have to be able to scrutinize these people, and if they make mistakes, they have to be called out. It's just the idea that should not be the case, I think, is anti-democratic.
All they did is parrot each other around the world. For the longest time, they said inflation was transitory, and it clearly wasn't transitory. And Canada is negative GDP, and we've had the low GDP per capita the lowest in the G7. All of these are policies, and the Liberals were spending like drunken sailors, and all of this is coming to roost right now, and then suppressing our natural resources, having no outside markets, and now here we are sitting at the whim of the Americans, and they have basically a bully in power there that is basically calling the shots, and and we don't have even a leadership that can challenge it right now. We don't have a clear mandate. We have a resigned prime minister, and we have different voices out there. We have Carney and Freeland and a few others. It's a perfect storm for the Americans.
Yeah, a perfect storm for us. Perfect sort of alignment of the planets, really, for the Americans, isn't it? It couldn't come at a better time for them.
Yeah.
But these things, it comes in cycles, doesn't it? It's unfortunate that we're in disarray, as they seem to have all their ducks in a row. But, in the next couple of years, when they have the midterms, after a few major Trump scandals, which we can assume will occur, the shoe might be on the other foot. But right now, yeah, it's such a mismatch.
Yeah. I think there should be some responsibility, and the media should be asking more questions of Tiff Macklem, because you contrast those two things there, what he just said and his excuse for what he said. They don't add up, and it should be held to account for that. There's no doubt about that.
Indeed. I mean, and the one, I should say, devil's advocate and all that to defend the Bank of Canada and Tiff Macklem, I would say he does have to appear now and then, doesn't he, at the certain committees. I think it's actually just one committee, isn't it, run by MPs, and they grill him and question him on his decisions. It doesn't really happen often enough, though, I would say. And also, anybody that's watched those committee appearances knows that he's quite defensive. This particular governor, Tiff Macklem, he's quite defensive, and he doesn't really answer questions. But it just becomes like a political sort of fight, and it's
I,
it's
I would
less than
say
ideal.
one of the biggest problems we've kind of like we keep carrying on since COVID is this. It's wrong to criticize. It's not wrong to criticize. That's how we get better. That's how we get better in sports. That's how we get better in everything. We must be able to criticize. Pierre Poilievre, they call him up because he criticizes the Liberal government. That's his role. He's the opposition party. That's his role, to criticize government. And that's his function, right? And we should all be able to, media should be criticizing the Liberal government. They're the ones in power. They should hold the Liberal government more to account than they hold Pierre Poilievre to account. That's the people in power are the ones that are supposed to be held to account.
Absolutely, yeah, and that was certainly inverted during the COVID years, where the media and almost all the institutions, for some reason, got it into their head that it was their job to defend and protect power and to fend off criticism and challenges. And that is obviously that's a disastrously bad habit to get into. And I suppose it's quite hard to get out of it. And a lot of people are struggling to get out of it. But that's the behavior of, just in terms of like temperament, that's the behavior of a dictatorship, obviously, isn't it? Where you protect the central power at all costs, and you fend off the opposition. Well, like, opposition is a filthy word that you don't want that word in your mouth, because it's like treasonous to even have it in your mouth. Like, you can see how countries like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, like Syria under the Assad family, you can see how that can kind of develop, and that sort of really bad habit can develop. I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that we're anything like that here, but it's that's how it happens, and we should be on watch for that. We should always watch out.
CBC new CEO Marianne Philippe Bouchard is warning that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's pledge to defund the state broadcaster is an existential threat. I would advise her to look up the word existential in the dictionary. Existential means extinct. Could it cripple CBC? For sure. But CBC also derives revenues. We get no funding. A lot of media outlets, free and independent media outlets, should figure out a way to have a plan so that they don't have to rely on the government handouts. And then obviously there's a lot of complaints in Canada about a liberal bias too from the CBC.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to CBC on the radio this morning briefly, just for a laugh, and it was actually about the Ontario election, and it was like people calling in to, it was almost like a streeters, but on the phone. They were just calling in to talk about the Ontario election, and every single one of them said, "I hate the Conservatives, and all I care about is like climate change and stuff like that." It's like, that's not representative, Mr. CBC, considering that the Conservative government has a majority in Ontario at the minute. So they don't do themselves any favors. But in terms of the lexicon, the CBC lexicon of employing that word existential, that's like a meme word, isn't it? It's just all of a sudden, like, I feel like a few years ago people learned that word for the first time, and they just throw it at absolutely everything. And it's just like, again, like we were talking about her yesterday, how she uses kind of like therapeutic language. She uses the language of the liberal left, and here she is using the language of the liberal left again. That word existential, I would say, infamously associated with climate change, where people like to say that it's an existential crisis, which it isn't. But then again,
somebody just said,
that's another topic.
Somebody just said that, do we have TDS, Trump derangement syndrome? Like, I believe that the U.S. President Donald Trump was elected on a mandate to put America first, and he's doing that. But he is also being a bully to Canada. But he's working on the mandate that he promised the American people, to put America first. Danielle Smith is working on a mandate to put Alberta first, and she's doing that. You can't tell me anybody in the federal government is putting Canada first, and I don't see that. So Donald Trump is doing what he said. He's got a to-do list. He's taking it off. Can we criticize him? Yeah, that's our role to criticize him because he's especially going after Canada. And it's a perfect storm right now for him to go after Canada because we have no real leadership and we have a bunch of voices and it's disjointed and we don't really know what we're doing. If the Liberals really cared about Canada, they would call an election right now and get a clear mandate and say, okay, then people can vote for Liberals or NDP or for the Conservatives. But we need an election so that we can have a clear voice that we can deal with the threats of the American government right now. But there's no way that I would say anything negative about Donald Trump from an American perspective because he's doing what he said he was going to do. Put America first.
Well, he didn't say he was going to put 25% tariff on Canada, but
whatever it takes, I guess, right?
Yeah, my main objection to Trump is, or right now anyway, obviously, I think every Canadian, everybody living in Canada, their perspective on Trump should be different the day before he said he was going to announce these tariffs and the day after. I mean, I think that's just essential because it's a punitive tariff on Canada that threatens the Canadian economy. Like, if there's anybody out there wondering at all, if he goes ahead with this, there will be a recession. It'll be brutal. Like, there's a possibility.
I think we're already in it.
You're going to lose your job, whoever you are. Like, life will suck, and it can't be fixed. It can't be fixed with a click of a finger because for 30 plus years, Canada's been completely joined at the hip to the United States economically, and has been so stupid that it hasn't properly built out its infrastructure to trade with the rest of the world, and is just focused on the US. So, your opinion should change. Your opinion of Trump as a Canadian should change. That's my opinion, based on him targeting Canada and threatening the livelihoods of Canadians, because he's going to make people miserable. I mean, what more reason do you want to be a critic of somebody? They're going to make your life miserable. But I would also say the thing that winds me up about Trump with this particular issue is that he's not being truthful. He's not telling the truth. And he's attacking Canada on false pretexts. He's talking about how fentanyl and illegal immigrants are coming in from Canada. It's tiny. That's not significant. It's not significant to the United States. It comes from Mexico, and elsewhere, like, people go through Mexico from other countries in the world. That's the problem. And things like even like submarines and cargo on like freighters when it comes from China. That's the problem. It's not Canada. And he's kind of talking Canada down and telling lies about Canada, and it's unjust. It's just not fair. It's not accurate, and it's not fair.
Again,
I think if Trump said, "Look, I'm going to put tariffs on Canada for these philosophical reasons because I believe in tariffs and I want the US to take jobs from Canada and be richer than it is right now," then I'd be like, "Oh, all right, well, it's an economic decision." But he's not saying that. He's like sort of trying to wrap it up in all kinds of nonsense, and also then now and then thrown in that he wants to annex Canada, which that's not a good way to win friends in Canada, is it?
No, like I said, he's being a bully. But we have no leadership. We have a resigned prime minister that's on a world tour, and we have a bunch of voices that are out there. Melanie Jolie, like you said, Mark Miller, and they're all down there saying different things. We have Doug Ford saying some stuff, Daniel Smith saying, and then David Eby, and there's just no real representation of what Canada is right now. Why don't the Liberals call an election? Call an election and let Canadians have a leader that can represent Canada.
Because I think they are prioritizing their own affairs over the national interest.
And there you have it.
That's
right?
what a cynic might say.
Yeah. We do appreciate all your comments. There's a lot of comments coming in. And then somebody said that they'd rather watch CBC. Well, hey, if we could have just even a sliver of their $2 billion, that would be nice. We get zero funding from the federal government, or the provincial government for that matter. And we managed to still stay on the air. And they're saying they need more money. And they take bonuses while they lay people off. I think it was last just recently at Christmas time, where they laid off a bunch of people, yet still took their bonuses. And even when just recently asked the new CEO about the bonuses, they declined to say whether they deserve bonuses or not.
I mean, CBC obviously has has some virtues, doesn't it? And we do mention when
I
they
grew
do
up
a
with
good
CBC.
story,
Yeah.
when they do a good article, and they do knock out a good article now and then.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually quite a good article. I mean, it's not very long or comprehensive, but there's quite a good article on there now about kind of like the history of NAFTA and free trade between Canada and the US. Like stuff like that's quite cool. It's quite good. Talking about like Mulrooney and Margaret Thatcher when she came over and intervened. Like that's good. That's good content, as they say.
Yeah.
But the problem with CBC is that that's a tiny, tiny fraction of what they put out. That a lot of what they put out it belongs on like the Huffington Post or some sort of like daft left-wing blog like that. It's just stupid, it's just a waste of time. And that's what upsets people about CBC, I would contend.
And I would say that we're willing to communicate with our viewers too, because I mean we're reading the comments as we go. And also, I would put up our BC election coverage up against anybody, and we don't get funding. So I think media outlets need to be free and independent, and we need Bill C-18 repealed so that we can have back our Facebook and Instagram.
Indeed, and it's not just us, is it? I mean, if you like media diversity, if you like independent media, lots of different voices, then you should want that. You should want that for many, many reasons.
Yeah, there's one person on the comments that seems definitely hell bent on calling us something. So great. Does she want to reply? Like we reply to anything. Just say something of value, and we'll say something. Let's move on to markets. We talked about gold that is going to like challenge that $2,800 mark. Here's a chart, a year chart on gold, and it has broken through this morning over the $2,800 mark. So now, that's that resistance line. So it'd be interesting to see what it does with that resistance line over the next few days. Again, a lot of world economic events affecting the price of gold, and and it's definitely, if you look at that in Canadian dollars, that's way up. So, and that's a reflection of our Canadian dollar. Bitcoin holding over that $100,000 mark, and looks like it's like again a head and shoulders formation there, and that could have a springboard. We've talked a lot about Bitcoin over the past little while. You can probably lighten up that background or darken that background now that the sun has come up. The Bitcoin looks like it's going to move higher in the next little while. The Canadian dollar looks fairly sick as usual. We can go this way a little bit, and the Canadian dollar actually broke through 69 cents there, and it's come back above that thing. That doesn't look good, and some of the policies, that is our stock chart of Canada, and that is a reflection of where the world sees Canada right now. And you can talk all you want to talk about stuff, but there's a fact right there in front of you, right? The lower that goes, the higher inflation goes for Canadians, right? When you try to go buy stuff, a lot of stuff priced in US dollars. So the lower that goes, the higher our costs go. So you can't sugarcoat that. That's what it is, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. Google, AI, in our AI segment here. Google's now saying that they're having the most advanced AI for weather forecasting. They're putting that into people's hands and scientists and all that stuff. I don't know what the weather people are going to do, right? Because I'm pretty sure weather can do quite a bit, with AI and all the technology that's around.
For quite a long time as well, at least in certain countries. I'm thinking particularly Latin America and Spain. When I used to go on my holidays to Spain, I would see this. Like the weather was just an excuse to put a very a woman of a certain appearance in front of the camera. But I was going to say, like, they'll still have a job, but if AI continues to develop, then they probably won't, will they? Because it'll just be an AI weather woman.
I listened to that the communication between the Black Hawk helicopter and the tower this morning as they played it through. The tower had said, "Do you see the airplane? Do you see the airplane?" And there's like, "Yes." And I think obviously it looks like they were looking at a different airplane. AI likely would have helped them a lot because it seems pretty obvious that the helicopter pilot was looking at a different plane because, there's a bunch of them coming in a line, right? And I think they were looking at the wrong plane and trying to avoid the other one because the tower asked several times, do you have visual contact? And you can go on X and you can listen to that whole interchange between, the tower and the Black Hawk helicopter.
There's new angles have been released now, haven't they? Like new videos, and it does look I can see why loads of people like Trump as well are like so confused and so baffled because it really does. It almost looks like the helicopter's like trying to hit the plane, doesn't it? It's
I mean, that's
it's very hard to wrap your head around.
I listened to the guy was a former pilot, and he says to him it looks like the pilot of the helicopter was trying to avoid a different plane because they come in a line. There was a bunch of them in a line as they're coming in, and the plane was on its regular path, like the path that everybody's taking on their, and it was taking off, right? So, yeah. Tragic. Tragic.
Very, very sad. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if this is a consolation necessarily, but the only thing that when I watched the newer videos, the only thing I could think to say is, like, thank God it was over very quickly. Like it went down really quickly, didn't it? So there wasn't that kind of like fallen miles down, knowing that the plane's going to crash kind of thing. It was just like relatively instantaneous.
And they did interview another Army pilot and saying, perhaps they were wearing their night vision goggles because it's training exercise, and maybe they didn't see the aircraft. I don't know.
Right. Sort of prompts the question, like, why are you doing a training exercise around civilian aviation?
They say they have to because that's a way to get, because that is in Washington, to get the president out of, something bad happens or something. So the Black Hawk helicopters work that area quite a bit. They were just at an altitude where they shouldn't have been at too. That's a thing that Trump has been saying. They should never been at that altitude. I'm sure more will come out over the next few days. And it sounds like the tower was understaffed, but the tower did say several times, "Do you see it? Do you see it? Do you see it?" So,
yeah, I mean, what can you do in that situation? You can only ask that question, really, can't you? Unless you just start like screaming abuse at them or something. But it's not. Don't think that would work either.
And a little more AI. We're going to show you some stuff, how AI is bringing the stuff to life. Here's a little video we're going to play for you. There you go. That's pretty cool. Just think of all the learning children will get to do with AI and stuff like that. Like at some point here, you'll be able to sit down with Marcus Aurelius. Your child will be able to sit down with Marcus Aurelius, and he'll be able to teach you from his, like they'll be able to create it so that you're actually speaking with Marcus Aurelius on what happened in the past and that, or Roman Empire, or Emperor, or what have you. From Winston Churchill, you get to know his plans and how he, fought for the freedom of the Western world.
As long as he's drunk 95% of the time, because that's
well,
what it would have to be authentic.
You have to keep it authentic, right?
Exactly.
And blow some smoke in people's face, a big cigar, stuff like that, right?
Yeah. And he also apparently used to go in the bath all the time and shout orders underneath the door. So maybe he could have an underneath the door effect as well while he's drunk in the bath.
And now the target of the liberals here in Canada, Tesla. We got this big fan of Tesla, but apparently now I'm supposed to hate them. But that's not going to happen. So this is part of their. Well, I'll let you play the clip here.
They leave gifts for me.
Can you go in full screen?
So kind. They feed me like a king. But I don't do it for accolades. My work is my sustenance, soaking up every last crumb in every last crevice. Potato chips. Like our own little game of hide and seek. Found you. It's a simple life, but as the sun is to a flower, vital. Until next time, my old friend.
Well, the future is now. That's a Tesla cyber cab they're going to start rolling in Austin in June. No steering wheel, no pedals. And that is their cleaning. So they pull into a cleaning bay and there's the robot. Sound like Marcus Aurelius as they're actually cleaning the car for you. Right?
I thought it sounded like Mufasa, you know?
Yeah, well, there you
Everything
go.
the light
Whatever you
touches.
need. And so even the chargers are going to be like they're saying they're going to have a pad that they just drive over and they get charged, so you don't have to plug them in. I don't know. The future is
That's
now.
more people losing their jobs though. What, you know? They're going to need new jobs now, people that would previously clean cars.
Well, you should have come to the seminar that we held yesterday on AI, and we had a Lane Merrifield there speaking to. Like, there'll be a lot of different jobs. That'll be like people will lose certain jobs, no different than the horse and buggy people lost their job, didn't they? But they got a different job, didn't they? The people that
Did
made
they?
records.
Are they
What's that?
still unemployed?
The
Did they
people
really
from
get another job?
the horse and buggy people? Well,
Yeah,
if they're
maybe
still
there's
looking,
some out there.
it's been a while, right? If
Yeah.
they're still looking for a job, that's a tough one. And then our friend Ruby just keeps on giving, right? And here's our support for the Liberal. Our friend Ruby, again, she's the Canadian Elon Musk. She loves her memes, eh? She's the I should say the king, the queen of the memes, right? Here's her meme on Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney in twins from Ruby Dalla, Liberal leadership candidate. If nothing else, she is bringing comedy to Canada.
Totally.
Comedic
It almost
relief.
looks like she's done this herself as well. And not exactly, it's not a good Photoshop, really, is it? If you look at Trudeau's neck, it's pretty clumsy Photoshop.
She's been accused of photoshopping her own photos too. So maybe she's really good at Photoshop.
Yeah, and that's Arnold Schwarzenegger, isn't it? On the left there. So I'm just finding that quite amusing. The idea of Justin Trudeau and Arnold Schwarzenegger fused as one person.
So somebody just said, how do you reconcile economic issues while endorsing automation and AI? I believe that AI will bring us an age of abundance and bring down prices. It's a deflationary thing. So you just have to open your mind up to it. And I get that it's threatening. And it's threatening to white collar jobs, especially if you're doing jobs in front of a computer. That is like jobs like myself, I'm a CPA. So those are the jobs that are definitely higher at risk. And I'll give you an example. When I worked in a CA firm a long time ago, we had a tax accountant. So if you were a lawyer and a CA at the time, like you were like God when somebody brought you a tax problem, and then he would take that into his room there with books, and he'd have all these books, and he'd be going through these, and we had computers then too, so going through all this research, and 3 or 4 days later he would come out with an answer. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, AI you put in the problem, and the answer is there before you can finish typing. So. But that frees you up to do more creative things as opposed to doing the research that's already there. So,
Well, there was somebody, I can't even remember who it was. Maybe it's like Mark Andreessen or some sort of tech guru was sort of suggesting that there's no point in sort of going to university now as a younger person and like specializing in something like the law or whatever. And I'm pretty sure he said you might as well go and like make a YouTube channel or something. Like that's probably your best hope of actually bringing in money. But when I hear people say things like that, I just think that's a bit glib, really, isn't it? Because who's gonna be the audience for this like infinity YouTube channels? Like I don't think, and also that's before you even consider something else, which is not everybody has creative instincts, and it's a lot of people like that. What job that you were just explaining there, that's usually associated with somebody that doesn't really have all that much creativity, but is really good at like systematic analysis and like organizing things. And like, what are they going to do?
So I mean, this person just brought up too. What about universal basic income? And that's likely coming in some way, shape, or form, right? But there'll be abundance for a lot of things. Like I was at the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. There is machinery out there, robots that are going to be helping in farming. And we did that when we did our show here in September with mushrooms. There's mushroom picking machines that optimize, like the productivity, the efficiency. They pick more mushrooms at a higher quality, and which will lower the price, so there'll be more food for more people. But there'll be different jobs. Like, hey, for all the people that don't hate Elon Musk, maybe you can colonize Mars. I know I'm kind of joking, but there will be things that maybe you don't even know that exist right now that may be available, right? So an open mind, it's happening, whether or not you like it. And right now, we are in an AI race. There's no denying, because with the Chinese releasing DeepSeek, they're not going to slow down. So we don't have a choice but to slow down. And what Ian and I have talked about several times, we have to be careful to become the EU, where we talk about regulation first as opposed to innovation. Innovation first, then regulate.
Yeah, create it and then put the sort of training wheels on, and then figure out how to regulate it.
But if you work like the Europeans on how to keep the bottle cap on the bottle so that somebody can still drink out of it, I mean, that's why the Europeans are in the place they're at.
Yeah, indeed. But I mean, another thing, you say it's happening whether we like it or not. I think it's also kind of it's getting to the point now with demographics where we almost like have to do something like this because we're running out of new people. Like the birth rate, and that's, some people think, oh well, immigration fixes that, but it's everywhere. It's even India now India's like teetering on the brink of being below replacement level, which means that the population will shrink, in the long run. China, which was considered to be almost like this source of like unlimited people, China now has one of the lowest birth rates in the world and is facing like a demographic crisis. So we're going to run out of people, basically.
That had to do with their policy a number of years ago, where they said you're only allowed to have one child. So
yeah, but it also other East Asian countries. It's not just East Asia, but it's everywhere really. But as those East Asian countries industrialize, like Japan and Korea, you could almost you could chart it on a graph. Like as they became more urban and more industrialized, the birth rate declined. That also happened in China, but China's got like a uniquely bad situation because they simultaneously, while they were going through that, they also did the one child thing, which hasn't helped much.
Population rates in many countries are actually below the replacement rate. So I mean, somebody just said that that we might be wrong in that. But you can go look at the charts; they're out there. Today's Friday. It's our last show of the week. We're on every Monday through Friday, and we do appreciate all the comments, whether, try to keep them polite at the very least, but definitely we're okay with criticism. Criticism is how we get better. I mean, somebody has been complaining about my hat. I stopped wearing a hat. Somebody complained about my grandma glasses. I switched glasses today, so no positive feedback, right?
Pink shirt. You had a bit of abuse for that, didn't you?
It was a red shirt, but yeah, people love abuse, right? I mean, so maybe try to be less abusive and more constructive, and then we'll get better as well with that, right? So we're on X, we're on YouTube, we're on
TikTok.
Yeah, we're on TikTok, and we're also we have a really large following on Facebook and Instagram, which has been blocked right now. It's going on a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Thanks to Bill C-18, which we would love to see repealed. We'd love to see if these liberal leaders would make an announcement on that, and then it might be a little easier for media. Again, I can show you media charts, stock charts for much of the media in Canada, and they're all very negative. And the one screaming the most for more money is CBC. We shouldn't have to fund the CBC. They should have to, everybody should be able to make it on their own. And obviously there's some CBC programs that deserve funding as well. But, we also should be able to make it on our own. And but we should not be handcuffed by taking away our platforms that we earned on our own.
Indeed.
With that said, we wish everybody a great weekend. And if you're in the British Columbia region, there's lots of snow warnings out there. So be careful out on the highways. Make sure you have the winter tires and you have a safety kit in your car in case you get stranded and up on an accident up on the Coke or on the Rogers Pass or something like that, where you have to be sitting in a lineup for a while. Make sure you have enough, put some granola bars in there, maybe a blanket, stuff like that too, right? So how's that?
Yeah, that's good advice. And 50 centimeters, I think, for Highway 3. So maybe don't take that road.
To our American friends, that's almost 2 feet, right? If we have any friends left after all the stuff that you were saying today.
Well, maybe they should beseech their president to be nicer to America's best friend, the best friend America has ever had and will ever have.
Definitely, Canadians have definitely contributed a lot to the Western world, including the Second World War, where I think on a per capita basis, we were the biggest contributors. So anyway, with that said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.